Hey, hey, might as well do another script, right? All right. Today's video is human beings don't think, they discuss. Well, I want to add something as I'm talking to you. They negotiate. The stronger the trust in yourself, the closer the discussion is. And I even drew a chart here yourself, people, you. And the range of trust is basically strong trust, weaker trusts. Here you go. Just to prove that that's what I did. Cool beans, yeah? Human beings don't think, they discuss. Well, at one point I described how everything is a negotiation, and well, a negotiation is a discussion with an end result, maybe with an intention. Yes. Uh, I find myself remembering basically times where I'm sitting with my family, where just random shit would pop up, right? And normally in these uh, intentionless times, what effectively happens is you I think the calm is uncomfortable, right? Like when nobody's saying anything, you're just kind of like chilling. I think there's a certain discomfort in it, or at the very least, that's our condition, and that's where basically it's discussions. Funny enough, sometimes they actually reach somewhere. Most times they're just there to kind of fill that vacancy. The reason I said intentionless is because most of my memory about these discussions were literally about something that happened, somebody that did something, or some new thing that people are talking about. It kind of lacks authenticity or uniqueness. All right, we're kind of like catching the flow of whatever's going on. And in this, it's just like, do we really think? I don't believe that. I believe we observe, we have thoughts, and our thoughts are triggered from our three aspects, which are me, myself, and I. And they live within our reality. And that's basically what we reflect onto the world. And the more structured our reality is, the more it kind of manifests itself. It's one of those like I really think the word manifests has been kind of like destroyed. Uh, yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of spiritual pornography out there. But anyways, so the idea is that when you have a thought, and I revert to discipline when it comes to that because like as when I was kind of like in that state in my life where I was kind of like lost, and the first thing I did was I absorbed everything in front of me. I was very intentional about just kind of like exploring everything that's in front of me. And one of the things I found was like discipline. We talked about discipline. Discipline makes sense, right? Like I understand it. But I think the the people that succeeded were the aggressive ones, or at least they succeeded in like reaching the algorithm were the aggressive ones. And the aggressive people that literally were just kind of like harsh on themselves. Gotta do this and fucking do this. Shut the fuck up. Tame your mind and like your mind is a bitch and all that shit. I don't necessarily like see that as a healthy relationship. I understand there are limitations. I understand, but okay. So the way I'm speaking about it, right? Like, I understand there are limitations that you have to put to yourself, but that's what you do with people, right? I understand there are things that you have to like kind of compromise on, but like how do you know them? How do you explore them? Literally kind of like observe your thoughts. Where are they coming from? Understand why they're coming there. And normally just kind of like engage with these thoughts. What is engagement? It's a form of discussion. Like we don't really think. We're kind of like discussing things with intention. It's a negotiation. Like the highlight is trust. Why? Because ultimately, like your thoughts are always going to be triggered based on the conditioning that you have. It's that like Indian proverb, like actually Native American proverb. It's like inside you live two wolves, and they're always fighting each other. And then the question was, which wolf won? And the elder responds, the one that you feed. So the idea is you're kind of like you're leaning towards one wolf over the other, whether it's like an evil wolf or a good wolf. I have no idea. Like, everything is subjective at the end of the day. You can do whatever the fuck you want. I believe in you. But the idea is what? The idea is this is basically like, whatever your thoughts are doing, they're doing it on their own. But where is your voice in all of this? Because you're kind of like the mediator that's allowing this to move forward. And ultimately, you can be the tyrant. And tyranny has its benefits because every once in a while you kind of have to put your foot down, right? But if you're always a tyrant, then eventually you're going to get a revolution. And I felt that. I felt that when I was completely shaming myself at one point. And effectively, what happened is like my mind got stirred even more instead of calming down or like falling in place. And at that point, I felt I was too weak to manage it. So what effectively I did is I let it go. And as my thoughts kind of like rambled and rambled and rambled, and I would just like let them go, and I'd write them down, and I'd let them go, and I'd write them down. Eventually, kind of like they came to like a form of submission. So at that point, I stopped becoming a tyrant. I became a bit more benevolent, I guess. And I believe that's where you kind of like that relationship, the initiation of that relationship is the origin of trust. But then trust also has to be sustained. How do you sustain trust? Well, the way your word is your bond. So I remember at that one point as well, I kind of like made a decision not to make statements anymore. Because every time I make a statement, effectively what my mind does is it starts finding ways to poke holes into it. And what my ego does, it's kind of like, oh, this is what you want, then fuck you, and then I don't do it. It's like I wake up in the morning to go walking, and then suddenly I'm super exhausted. Whilst like the days I go, like I would want to enjoy tomorrow's walk or something like this. And suddenly, like there's a lot more harmony instead of like tomorrow I'm waking up at 5 or like I love this shit. But yeah, that building that trust, and then you have to sustain it, and sustaining that trust kind of like puts you in a certain place that's you're reliable, I guess. And then when you're reliable, what happens with your thought is they stop becoming like intrusive and they start becoming suggestive. And I'm literally telling you how I kind of like process things. Or I'm reflecting on them. Like genuinely, this is basically making me think of it differently. And so at that point, what kind of I was a tyrant and I became benevolent. But that definitely wasn't a democracy, right? Because I'm still in charge. Democracy doesn't really exist in my head. It really can't, because ultimately, if it's a democracy and you have like 500 thoughts that are kind of like fucked up and one thought that is good, then ultimately the 500 thoughts that are fucked up will win. So democracy cannot work, at least with you individually, which probably shows why I don't necessarily believe it works in the real world as well. But anyways, like I really believe that democracy has become like two sides of the one coin. And effectively, what we did is we uh, valuing, instead of valuing whatever actually creates value, we started valuing the money that comes out of value, right? Like money has no value unless you spend it. Like the millionaires, in example, Lebanon, there are people who had millions of dollars in the banks, but because of the collapse that happened like 3, 4 years ago, their millions of dollars are worth shit now. So like, were they ever worth anything, right? Things that have have value are kind of You have value. Whatever you're working on creates value. Assets have value because they provide a roof on top of your head. But anyways, so like what I became a benevolent dictator, maybe. Like I went from a tyrant to a bit more benevolent to like a benevolent dictator. Maybe a leader. Maybe that's what a leader is. Sovereign. I love that word. Sovereign, like being in charge. And it's funny because like as I change, I realize that me being in charge is gonna be questioned by my thoughts. And so as I actually am changing, or the environment around me is changing, and I'm progressing on my timeline towards my ambitions, my leadership style doesn't necessarily have to change, but it has to catch up to the new things that are happening. Because ultimately, like what your thoughts are kind of like are about they're kind of questions that need to be answered. And that's basically like if somebody makes a statement, how do you respond? Yes or no? But a statement that's faulty, effectively, you either are asking a question or if somebody's asking a question, you're answering them. So there's always that hole to be filled. And it feels like your thoughts become kind of like questions. They're a lot less, this is happening versus like, this is happening. And then you have as the, the benevolent dictator that you are, or the leader that you are, whatever, in your own head, your voice. Remember that one voice, because all your thoughts are coming from the different voices of your emotions. And ultimately, what happens is you basically are always engaging. You're building that trust. You're sustaining that trust that was given to you, and you understand that there's trust when the voices in your head are no longer aggressive with you. It's because they respect you now, and that's something that you've actually established with the relationship with them, and which shows trust. But there's no such thing as complete trust because you can always fuck up. But how you handle it is how you prove you're reliable and how you're always going to be trusted and always going to be basically loved. Because there's always that test to kind of like not your voice, like a voice of your past is always going to basically like kind of test you through the triggers of life. Like a trigger would bring it back, and if you don't handle it properly or differently, because like if you handle it a certain kind of way, at one point that worked, now it doesn't. And if you don't handle it properly, what effectively happens is it kind of like goes like, I want to be the leading voice. And ultimately, like, you're allowing that. You kind of like, I don't want to use the word failing, but you kind of hesitating maybe, or you being on shaky ground, indecisive, uh, inauthentic, ununderstanding, right? Like, no, instead of saying, "Khalas, fuck off, man, I saw you once before." Like, we've had a discussion, kind of like being like, "Hey, come on, man, why are you back? What's bringing you back?" And I think at that point, that's when you become sovereign, or at the very least, you're that's where you kind of develop the pattern where you're able to kind of sustain where you're at. Because like that is the pattern of change. That's the universal pattern of change. It's always kind of like what's going on. And it kind of it feels like that's the way our thoughts happen. Because we don't really think. We either are discussing stuff randomly and having random thoughts pop up, or we're negotiating, which is a discussion with intention. And that allows us to build trust. And naturally, when I'm talking about thoughts, they're coming from somewhere. And the better way to deal with yourself, the better way you'll be able to deal with fun stuff. It's a video, and I love